I still remember the first time I stepped into the house. It was an old Victorian, nestled deep in the woods, far from the bustling city I once called home. My heart ached for solitude, and this house seemed to be the perfect retreat. Little did I know, it was the beginning of a living nightmare. The drive up the gravel path felt endless. Trees loomed on either side, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The house came into view, standing solemnly against the backdrop of a setting sun. It was beautiful in a haunting way, with its peeling paint and overgrown garden. As I unlocked the door, a sense of foreboding washed over me, but I dismissed it as mere nervousness. Inside, the air was musty and still. Dust motes danced in the beams of light that filtered through the dirty windows. I walked through the rooms, feeling a strange mix of excitement and unease. The furniture, though covered in white sheets, hinted at a once grand past. It felt as though the house had been waiting for someone to breathe life back into it. My first night was uneventful. I settled into the master bedroom, the only room I had cleaned thoroughly. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, and I drifted off to sleep easily. But then, in the dead of night, I was jolted awake by a sound, a faint whisper, like the rustling of leaves. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear. The house was silent. The next morning, I explored the grounds. The garden was wild, with weeds overtaking what must have once been beautiful flower beds. An old swing set creaked in the breeze, and I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. The isolation was palpable, pressing in on me from all sides. As days turned into weeks, the whispers became more frequent. At first, they were soft, almost imperceptible, but gradually, they grew louder, more insistent. I would hear my name being called, always from another room. Alex, Alex. The voice was always just out of reach, always luring me deeper into the house. One evening, as I was reading in the living room, I heard a child's laughter. It was clear and bright, cutting through the oppressive silence. I jumped up, following the sound to the staircase. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer, only the echo of my own voice. I began to see shadows moving out of the corner of my eye, dark shapes that flitted past doorways and disappeared when I turned to look. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of being watched was relentless. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind seemed to carry a hidden threat. One night, the whispers led me to the basement. I had avoided it until then, feeling an irrational fear of what lay beneath the house. The door was heavy, groaning on its hinges as I pushed it open. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness. The basement was damp and cold. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. I fumbled for a light switch, finally finding a pull chain. The single bulb flickered to life, casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the corner, I saw an old chest. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, as if it hadn't been touched in years. Curiosity overpowered my fear. I knelt beside the chest, wiping away the grime. The latch was rusty, but it gave way with a bit of effort. Inside, I found old photographs, letters, and a small, ornate box. The photographs were black and white, depicting a family, mother, father, and 2 children. Their faces were stern, unsmiling. The letters were brittle with age, written in an elegant hand. They spoke of happiness and love, but there was an underlying sadness in the words. I opened the ornate box with trembling hands. Inside was a locket, tarnished with age. I held it up to the light, prying it open. Inside was a small portrait of a young girl, her eyes wide and haunting. As I stared at the picture, a cold breeze swept through the basement, extinguishing the light. I scrambled to my feet, panic surging through me. The darkness was suffocating. I fumbled my way to the stairs, tripping and falling in my haste. I could hear the whispers growing louder, more urgent. "Alex, come play with us." I burst through the basement door, slamming it shut behind me. My heart was racing, my mind in turmoil. I could feel the presence of the house closing in on me, its malevolent energy palpable. I knew I had to leave, but something kept me rooted to the spot. The next few days were a blur. The whispers became screams, echoing through the halls. I barely slept, jumping at every sound. The shadows grew darker, more defined. I could see faces in the windows, watching me with cold, dead eyes. I reached out to a local historian, hoping to find answers. He told me the house had a dark history. The family in the photographs had lived there over a century ago. The father had gone mad, murdering his wife and children before taking his own life. The bodies were never found, and the house had been abandoned ever since. Armed with this knowledge, I tried to cleanse the house. I burned sage, recited prayers, anything to banish the spirits, but nothing worked. The activity only intensified. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and the whispers turned into guttural growls. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see someone there, but there was no one. The bed sank as if someone had sat down beside me. I could feel cold breath on my neck, hear the faintest of whispers. "Join us." I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my bags, deciding to leave the house for good, but as I reached the front door, it wouldn't open. No matter how hard I pulled, it remained locked. Panic set in as I tried every window, every exit. I was trapped. The whispers turned into screams, deafening and relentless. I could feel invisible hands pulling at me, dragging me back into the depths of the house. I fought with all my strength, but it was futile. The house had claimed me. Now, as I write this, I can feel them closing in. The family that once lived here, their tortured souls bound to this place. They want me to join them, to become part of their eternal nightmare. If you find this, please, stay away from the House of Echoes. It hungers for the lonely, the lost, and it will never let you go. Days turned into weeks, then months. I stopped counting the time. The house became my prison, my tormentor. The whispers, the shadows, the cold touches, they were my constant companions. I stopped sleeping, the fear of what lurked in the darkness keeping me awake. The once comforting solitude I sought had become a suffocating isolation. I tried everything to escape. I even considered setting the house on fire, hoping to destroy whatever evil resided within. But every attempt was thwarted. The house seemed to have a will of its own, a consciousness that prevented any harm coming to it. Matches wouldn't strike, the stove refused to ignite, and every sharp object disappeared. The historian I had contacted tried to reach out, sensing my desperation. He visited once, but as he approached the house, he was overcome with a sudden illness. He never returned my calls after that, and I was left completely alone, with no one to believe my story or help me. One stormy night, the whispers led me to the attic. I had never dared to explore it before. The stairs were steep and narrow, creaking with every step. As I reached the top, a sense of dread washed over me. The attic was filled with old furniture, trunks, and cobwebs. In the center of the room was a large, ornate mirror covered with a dusty sheet. I pulled the sheet away, revealing the mirror. It was tall and imposing, with an intricately carved wooden frame. The glass was cloudy, and my reflection was distorted. As I stared into it, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. Faces appeared in the mirror, ghostly and pale. They were the family from the photographs, their eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "Help us," they whispered. "Release us." I reached out to touch the mirror, and the glass felt icy cold. Suddenly, a force pulled me forward, and I was drawn into the mirror. I found myself in a dark, shadowy realm, a twisted version of the house. The family stood before me, their spectral forms flickering like candle flames. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice echoing in the void. "We are trapped," the father said, "our souls bound to this house by a curse. You are the key to our freedom." "How?" I asked, my mind reeling. "The locket," the mother said. "You must find it and destroy it." I woke up back in the attic. The mirror shattered around me. The locket, the one I had found in the basement, was now my only hope. I retrieved it and made my way to the garden. The whispers were now screams, urging me on. I dug a hole in the garden, placing the locket inside. As I covered it with dirt, the ground trembled. A bright light erupted from the spot, blinding me. When I opened my eyes, the house was silent, the oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and the shadows were gone. I left the house that night, never to return. The family had been freed, their spirits finally at peace, but the experience left me scarred, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks in the most unexpected places. If you ever come across an old, abandoned house, listen to your instincts. Some places are meant to be left alone. The House of Echoes still stands, its secrets buried deep. It waits for the next lonely soul to wander in, to become part of its haunting tale. Now, I live far away, surrounded by people and noise, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear the faintest whisper of my name carried on the wind, Alex, and I know, deep down, that the House of Echoes will never truly let me go. I had always been drawn to solitude, craving the peace and quiet that only an isolated location could offer. When I found the small, rustic cabin deep in the woods, it seemed like a dream come true. The realtor described it as a perfect getaway, a place to escape the chaos of the city. I didn't need much convincing. I packed my things and moved in, eager to start a new chapter of tranquility, but my dream of peaceful seclusion quickly turned into a nightmare. The cabin was quaint and cozy, with a charming fireplace and large windows that looked out over the dense forest. It felt like a refuge, a place where I could finally find the quiet I so desperately needed. The first few days were blissful. I spent my time reading, hiking, and simply enjoying the serene environment. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a distant bird. One night, as I was sitting by the fireplace, I heard a noise outside. It was faint at first, like the creaking of wood. I dismissed it as an animal or the house settling, but the sound persisted. It grew louder, more distinct. It was the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. My heart raced as I peered out the window, but the darkness was impenetrable. The next morning, I found footprints in the soft earth around the cabin. They were large, too large to be an animal. A sense of unease settled over me, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a hunter or a hiker passing through. I convinced myself there was nothing to worry about. Days turned into weeks, and the sense of being watched grew stronger. I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows flitting between the trees. At night, the footsteps would return, pacing around the cabin, sometimes stopping right outside my window. I began to dread the setting sun, knowing the darkness would bring with it the unseen watcher. One particularly cold night, I awoke to the sound of tapping on the window. It was rhythmic, almost gentle. I sat up, my heart pounding, and stared into the inky blackness outside. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low, raspy whisper, "Come outside." The voice was barely audible, but it sent chills down my spine. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When dawn finally broke, I ventured outside, hoping to find some clue to explain the haunting presence. The footprints were back, but this time, they led away from the cabin, deeper into the forest. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow them. The trail wound through the trees, leading me to a clearing I hadn't discovered before. In the center stood an old, dilapidated shed. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, the wood rotting and overgrown with moss. The door was ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze. I approached cautiously, my curiosity warring with my fear. Inside, the shed was dark and damp. An old, rusted lantern hung from a nail on the wall. I lit it, the dim light casting eerie shadows. The shed was filled with old tools, broken furniture, and strange carvings on the walls. They were symbols I didn't recognize, but they gave off an unsettling energy. In the corner of the shed, I found a small, dusty journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, the handwriting spidery and difficult to read. As I flipped through it, a story began to emerge, a story of a man who had lived in the cabin long before me. He wrote about the solitude, the peace he found, and then the growing sense of being watched. The journal detailed his descent into paranoia, the whispers he heard at night, the footsteps that haunted him. The final entry was chilling. I can't take it anymore. The Watcher won't leave. I see him in the trees, always watching, always waiting. I've tried to leave, but the forest won't let me. I'm trapped. If anyone finds this, beware. The Watcher is real, and he wants something. I fear I'll never escape. I dropped the journal, my hands shaking. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The Watcher wasn't just a figment of my imagination. He was real, and he had been haunting this place for years. I had to leave, but the cabin now felt like a prison, the forest a labyrinth designed to keep me trapped. That night, I barricaded myself inside, every noise amplified by my fear. The footsteps returned, but this time, they were accompanied by the sound of scratching at the door. The whispers were louder, more insistent. Come outside, join me. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and a knife from the kitchen and stepped outside. The air was freezing, the night silent except for the crunch of my footsteps on the frosty ground. I shone the flashlight around, searching for any sign of the Watcher. The beam caught a figure standing at the edge of the forest. He was tall and thin, his face obscured by a hood. He didn't move, just stood there, watching me. I felt a wave of terror and anger. What do you want? I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. The figure didn't respond. Instead, he slowly raised a hand and pointed deeper into the forest. Compelled by some unseen force, I followed his gesture. The figure disappeared, but I continued walking, the path illuminated by my flashlight. I reached the clearing with the shed and noticed something I hadn't seen before, a large stone slab, partially buried under leaves and dirt. Carved into the slab were the same symbols from the shed. I cleared the debris away, revealing a metal latch. It took all my strength to lift the heavy slab, revealing a dark hole beneath. The whispers grew louder, emanating from the darkness. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but something compelled me to climb down into the hole. The passage was narrow and damp, the air thick with the smell of earth and decay. I crawled through, my flashlight flickering. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices urging me forward. I emerged into a small underground chamber. In the center was an altar, and on it lay an old, tattered book. The book was bound in leather, its pages brittle and covered in the same strange symbols. As I opened it, a cold breeze swept through the chamber, extinguishing my flashlight. I was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the symbols on the walls. The book contained rituals and incantations, things I couldn't comprehend, but one page stood out. It described a ritual to bind a spirit to a place, to trap it for eternity. The symbols matched those in the cabin and the shed. The Watcher was bound to this place, and the ritual was the key. I realized with horror that I was the next victim, drawn here to continue the cycle. The Watcher needed a successor, someone to take his place, to be trapped in the eternal watch. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. I had to act quickly. I tore the page from the book, intending to destroy it, but as I did, the chamber shook violently. The whispers turned to screams, the air thick with malevolence. I scrambled back through the passage, the ground shaking beneath me. As I emerged from the hole, the stone slab slammed shut behind me. I ran back to the cabin, my heart pounding. I had to leave, had to escape before it was too late. But as I reached the front door, I saw the figure standing there, blocking my way. His hood fell back, revealing a face twisted in agony. It was the man from the journal, his eyes pleading. "Please," he whispered, "release me." I understood then what I had to do. I grabbed the journal and the torn page, setting them on fire in the fireplace. As the flames consumed the paper, the figure screamed, a sound of pure torment. The fire roared, the cabin shaking as if trying to expel the evil within. Then, as suddenly as it began, the fire died down. The cabin was silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, the figure was gone, and the whispers had ceased. I knew the Watcher was finally free, his spirit released from its torment. I left the cabin that night, not daring to look back. The forest seemed less menacing, the air lighter. I drove away, vowing never to return. The cabin now stands empty, a silent witness to the horrors that unfolded within its walls. If you ever find yourself drawn to a place of solitude, beware. Sometimes, the peace you seek can turn into a nightmare. The Watcher may be gone, but the darkness he left behind still lingers, waiting for the next lonely soul to claim.